What is your self-concept? What is your self-image? How do you see yourself? Your self-concept is the sum total of all the adjectives you use to describe yourself. And some are positive, some are negative. Basically, whatever ones you use, and it basically begins to look something like this sort of over your lifetime, where you get a variety of adjectives you use to describe yourself, and pretty soon you begin to be able to see yourself pretty clearly. And then every once in a while you add another thing in terms of who I am or where I fit or what I am or how I work or how I think. And you keep adding terms just like you did there. And some of the terms are very positive. That's a positive self-concept. Some are very negative. That's a negative self-concept. And if your positive is more than your negative, you have a positive self-concept. You know a lot of people that have a very positive self-concept. Doesn't mean it's a perfect person. It just means a lot of their thoughts are that they think positively about themselves instead of negatively. We also have a lot of people we know that have a negative self-concept. No matter what they do, they think, yeah, but it isn't right, or I'm not good, or, you know, it's like they have more negatives to describe themselves as positive. What personal growth is when you take a negative and turn it into a positive. I'm way overweight, well, I lose weight, and it's sort of a personal growth area. And what I'm going to share with you today will probably add an element or two or three to your self-concept. There'll be 2 or 3 thoughts today that you'll say, you know, I've never thought of that, but here's who I am, and here's who I am, and here's who I am. There'll be maybe 3 or 4, maybe even 5 things that come out of this session that will help you define you to you. But it will also help you define sort of who I am in terms of where I fit within the organization. It will also be a tool that you can use to help find this person that's coming in to interview for a position, would they be good for this organization? It'll help you also find or understand why this person that isn't working on our team doesn't fit. It'll help you understand also why some husbands and wives have fairly different approaches to life, because one's on one end of the continuum and the other one's on the other. Well, that's sort of an introduction. I don't expect you to really understand all that much yet. But now let me show you what those areas are that can help you define yourself to yourself and help you understand people better and building a team better. You've been given a team profile. Now, this team profile has been one of our best-selling tools in our entire catalog for a number of years. And what it explains is that if you'll look at page 12, I'll draw page 12 out for you a little bit. And by the way, there's going to be a lot more things that I would like to, by the way, we'll come back to this in the end to show you what it means more. But there are a lot of topics in here, a lot of thoughts in here I'd like to cover, but I don't have time today. So I would encourage you to read the team profile very carefully. When you get home, read it very carefully, because it will answer a lot of the things that I may not have time to answer today in this limited session, okay? But what it means is this. About 1980, I began to see that as an idea develops through time, it goes through 3 very distinct phases. It goes through a design phase. It starts in a design phase. Every idea, project, program that you've ever done started in the design phase. Then there's a develop phase and a stable phase. And where these overlap, you've got a design develop phase and a develop stable phase. You've got that on your paper there on page 12. This is the phase of development that something is in. You may say, well, what gave you the first clue, Sherlock? Everyone's known this since the wheel. I say, yes, but what I began to see in 1980 was that everyone, including you, prefer one phase to the other four. And when you can begin to define the phase and what's in the phase, and begin to help people see where they fit in the phase, it begins to help you know, who should we add to the team right now? What are we missing on the team right now? Who's on the team that we don't need right now? Some of those kind of questions. And so the phase, I'll help you know how to decide what phase you prefer, which in fact, you can say, well, I'm a designer, or I'm a stabilizer, I'm a developer. That begins to be one of the concepts that may be new to you in defining you to you. And it may be a concept that helps you say who on the team is a designer versus a designer-developer versus a stabilizer. And so it begins to give you just a little bit different language to help understand yourself and your team. This is the phase of development that you prefer. And then there's a second dimension, and that is the level. In each of these phases, some people prefer to be the presidential captain. You may prefer to be in charge of everything. In whatever you're involved in, as soon as you feel comfortable or confident in it at all, you want to be the president. You want to be the head coach, the top dog, the headmaster, whatever. You want to be in charge of everything. And that's fine. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people would rather be in charge of a department or division, but they don't want to be in charge of everything. That may be you. You may say, well, doesn't everyone want to be president? I say, no. No, most people don't. Only 1 or 2% of the population wants to be a leader, let alone the president of something. You say, well, I thought everyone wanted to be president. I say, no, they do not. And some want to be the middle captain. Some want to be a department head or a division head or a vice president or something like that, but they don't want to be the presidential captain. But they really enjoy having a team that they're leading, but they don't want to be in charge of everything. Some people say, I don't want to be a captain at all. I don't want to lead a team at all. I want to be a strong player on the team, but I do not want to be the captain of anything. Now, it doesn't mean I don't want to have respected input to the decisions, the directions, the ideas, etc. I want to have respected input. I just don't want to be the captain of anything. And for all 5 of these phases, you could be any one of these phases, and you can be any one of these levels. Everyone in this room fits in one of those phases and every one of those levels. Now, you may say, well, what's the value of this? I say, once I know your team profile, what you prefer at each of these levels, I can literally predict 40,000 things about you. And you think I'm kidding, but I'm not. As you get a dictionary of occupational titles of all the jobs listed in society, and you say, would this person like to be a parachute a plane jumper? No. Would this person like to be a routine accountant? No. Would this person like to be a performer or an entertainer or yeah, probably. And it can tell which really fits you well. It tells a lot about you. And once you know how to find this out about a staff member, it can tell you a lot about where they would fit on the team, or do we need them on a team at this point. Now, let me begin to help you understand sort of which you are in terms of what phase you prefer. To do that, I would ask you to get in your mind. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand or admit it or stand up or anything like that. But in your mind, ask yourself this. If you are in an area of your confidence and competence, you really know what you're talking about, and something comes up that you've never seen before, that's a problem. It's an issue. If you had your preference not what you've done the most in the past, not what your current position requires. If you had your absolute preference, would you start with a blank sheet of paper and come up with an original concept to deal with it? Or would you say, hey, can we find 2 or 3 samples of what other people have done successfully and adapt from them to create something that's better than any of them? Would you, if you had your preference, start with a blank sheet of paper, or would you start with adaptable samples? Get that clearly set in your mind. You may not be like your dad or your mom or your wife or your husband. You may not be like your brothers or sisters in any way of this, any of these. But if it's just you, and if you could do anything you want to do, would you start with a blank sheet, original kind of concept, or would you start with adaptable samples? Everybody got that in mind one way or the other? Okay. A designer will always start with a blank sheet of paper. A designer developer will always start with a blank sheet of paper. They have their preference. A developer will always start with adaptable samples. Developer stabilizer will always start with adaptable samples, as will a stabilizer. Now, how do you decide if I'm a designer or a designer developer? You say, I start with a blank sheet of paper. I say, okay. If you start with a blank sheet of paper, would your preference be to just stay with the theory, the philosophy, the theology, but when it comes to an original or a personal application of that theory, you say, I don't want to get into the application. Someone else can do that. I just want to stay in the theory. Then you're a designer. If you want to stay in the theory, philosophy, theology, but not get into the practical application, you're a designer. If you say, no, I like to start with a blank sheet of paper, but I want to see it practically applied, then you're a designer developer. If you say, I like adaptable samples, and I say, all right, let me ask you this. If you had your absolute preference, by the way, this is all spelled out in the tool. I'm just sort of taking you through it quickly. If you had your preference, would you set goals and be goal-oriented? Are you naturally excited by goals and actually, regardless of where you worked or didn't work, you'd set goals? Are you naturally a problem solver? You're naturally more oriented by problems, excited by problems? Are you more goal-oriented or problem-oriented? Not what other people expect you, not what your dad was, mom was, but are you more problem-oriented or goal-oriented? By nature, which is most exciting to you personally. Got that in mind? Okay. The developer is always goal-oriented. The developer stabilizer is always problem-oriented. And the stabilizer is always problem-oriented. You say, okay, I know now whether I'm a designer, developer, or developer based on the original versus adaptive. But how do I know developer versus developer stabilizer? I say, if you're goal-oriented, you're a developer. If you're problem-oriented here, you're either a developer stabilizer or a stabilizer. But how do I know if I'm a developer stabilizer or a stabilizer? I say, well, let me ask you this. If someone were going to honor you, would you rather be thought of as faithful or loyal? You say, well, I've had a lot of people say, well, what's the difference? I say, well, you tell me the difference. You tell me which you'd rather be, and then I'll explain the difference and see if it works. You say, well, I think I'm probably, I want to be both, but I think I'm more faithful than loyal. Faithful is more important to me than loyal. I say, okay. It's faithful. The developer stabilizer always chooses faithful to the task. And the stabilizer says I'm loyal to the person. The developer stabilizer says if I go home and I get more done, even if people weren't quite as happy, I feel better about the day than if the people were happy but I didn't get anything done. The stabilizer says, when I go home at the end of a day, even if we didn't get quite as much done, if the people were happy, I'm more happy. Okay? It's like the developer stabilizer always says this, the stabilizer always says this. Now, is this making sense to you so far in terms of who you are, how it works with you? Let me give you a couple other things. I want to give you the honor words. In other words, if you're going to be honored at a dinner, what word would you like to have used about you? Zingo is a blank person. These are all honor words. None of them are insult words. None of them are meant to be better or more or less than any of the others. But let me show you what they are. The designer says, I want to be brilliant. I'd say Zingo is a brilliant person. You say, well, wouldn't everyone like to be thought of as brilliant? I say, sure, but just hang on and see what other words there are. The designer-developer would rather be seen as wise. You say, I guess if I had wise or brilliant, I guess I would rather be wise. Brilliant may just sit in a room somewhere and talk. I guess I would rather be seen as that. Even though I'd like to be called brilliant, wise is probably better as far as I'm concerned. The developer is courageous. They'll take on things other people won't take on. You think, well, wouldn't you want to be thought of as wise or brilliant? Probably not. Probably more courageous. And then the stabilizer, developer stabilizer, is faithful. The stabilizer is loyal. Let me show you now the burnout. Let me show you when you burn out, because this is often helpful for you in understanding where you are at the moment and why you're feeling burned out. The designer burns out when the problem is solved theoretically. You can work on a problem for 10 years, work on this problem of how to cure cancer or something. For 10 years, never get tired of it theoretically. The second you solve it and it's time to make it practical, done, you take it from here. And you're burnt out the second it's solved theoretically. The designer-developer is 7/8 of the way through the first prototype. In other words, you like to come up with an original idea. You like to get it up and going. And when it's 7/8 of the way through the first one and it's working and everybody says, I can see this thing's going to work. You say, okay, I'm done. I proved that that theory was right. I got it practical. Now you take it from here. The developer is 2 years and 1 day. Basically 2 years. It's like 2 years, I need a new challenge. I'm getting burned out on this. 18 months, oh, that's good to go. 2 years, oh man, I'm getting burned out on this. Or when the problem is solved, when the goal has been reached, rather. When the goal has been reached, the developer wants a new challenge. Even if it's 6 months. The goal is reached, we need a new goal here. The developer stabilizer is 4 years. They like to take something when it's got a lot of problems, get it to where it's running smoothly, and then come back and take on a little bit more challenge. The stabilizer is 20 years plus. Stabilizer can keep doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years. That to other people it doesn't seem that different. To them it seems like there's a lot of variety in it, but to them it's like to other people it seems like this routine you're not tired of after 40 years. You deliver mail on the same route for 40 years. You say, it isn't the same route. They're different people all the time. And the letters look different, like that. They can do something for 20 years, or when there's disloyalty. Now, we've had presidents of the United States. We've had presidents of your country all the way across here. It isn't dumb and smart. It's just what phase you prefer and how you will lead and how it'll operate. And it depends a lot on where the country is or where the project is or where the company is as to what kind of leader it needs. Now there are two things that even though leadership isn't one way or the other, there's one thing that is exponential this way. And there's something that's exponentially this way. And the thing that goes exponentially this way is boredom. There's the further you go this way, the more boring it is to the person over here. And the more you go this way, the more stressful it is to the person over here. To the designer, talking to another designer isn't boring at all. Talking about the theory of it. But talking to a designer developer about how we're going to develop the first one, but talking to the developer how we're going to sell more of them, to the designer, oh man. Talking to the developer stabilizer how we're going to improve it now 4 years later. Talking to the stabilizer about we've been at it 20 years now and it still works. It's like, shoot me with a dang gun. It's like, oh, so boring, okay? But to the stabilizer, talking to another stabilizer about how it's worked for 20 years isn't boring at all. It isn't stressful at all. We know how it works. It's working fine. It isn't stressful at all. But talking to a developer stabilizer who wants to change it somewhat, improve it, refine it, you mean it's going to change? Oh, no. Talking to the developer, it's like the market says we need to change it this way. Talking to a designer developer that thinks we're going to come up with a whole new original solution to it, but we'll tell you when it gets there. It's like, oh man, it's going to change. Oh, I don't like the sound of this. Talking to a designer who's talking about the theory behind it, it's like, You can see how that works both ways. Here's the problem. Sometimes a designer is married to a stabilizer. You see the implications of that pretty quickly? Sometimes the level is an issue. By the way, this is not gender-based. A lot of women are here, a lot of men are here, a lot of women are here, a lot of men are here. It's like, it's not gender-based. Women can be any of them, men can be any of them. But if you do much counseling, you're going to run into this, where the husband is a problem solver, not a goal setter. But the wife is a goal setter, like her dad was. And she's waiting for Zingo to grow up and set some goals like her dad did. I say, wait a minute, time out. No, he's not going to set goals. He's a problem solver, not a goal setter. Relax. But he can be the president of the company if he wants to be, setting goals or solving problems. I've heard it said, well, to be a leader, you have to be a goal setter. You know what that is? Sheer nonsense. It's like, you do not have to be a goal setter to be a leader, period. You do not. You know why I know? A high percentage of the presidents I've worked with, the senior executives I've worked with that are extremely successful, were not goal setters. A high percentage of the division heads and the department heads that I've worked with over the past 40 years have not been goal setters at all. As a matter of fact, they hate setting goals. They never set goals. They don't want to set goals, and they don't set goals.
Amen.
Amen. And I say, often after this talk, people come up and say, you know, you've just given me a whole new lease on life. I say, what happened? I know what's coming. They say, this is one of the freest days of my life because I didn't think I could be a real leader because I was a problem solver. And you've helped me see that, wait a minute, maybe I can be a leader after all without becoming a goal setter. Because I hate setting goals, but I love solving problems. I say, depending on where the company is, once it's reached a critical mass, an organization will grow just as fast if you never set another goal in the entire organization. If you keep solving the problems that goals create. If you solve the problems that growth creates. If you simply, as a company grows, if you solve those problems, it'll grow again. If you solve those problems, it grows again. It'll just keep growing as fast just by setting goals as it does by solving problems as it does by setting goals. Another point I'd like to make is that coming back to your self-concept, as you see yourself today, as you describe yourself today, are you a designer or designer developer, developer stabilizer, which are you? As you describe yourself today, are you a presidential captain, a middle captain, or a strong player? As you describe yourself today, are you a goal-oriented person, or a problem-oriented person, or an opportunity-oriented person? Just by giving yourself those 3 additional descriptors, it helps you, it basically strengthens your understanding of your own self-concept. As well as then, when you start interviewing people or reassigning people or any of those things, that those same descriptors, those same adjectives will help you in placing the right person in the right place in the organization as the organization develops. Because some organizations where the entire organization is sort of right in this phase. Well, in that phase, you don't need a lot of stabilizers. But some organizations are sort of down in here, at which point designers would simply be stressful to deal with. So you're trying to figure out, where is the organization, where is the project, what kind of team profile do we need to lead this program or to lead the company at this point, kind of thing. And if you got a company that's down in here and say, we've got to revitalize the company, bringing someone from back here really stresses the staff out. And so you might want to move back here a little ways instead of clear back here. Are we out of time? Okay, time left, 0. So I hope that you've been able to add some additional dimensions to self-definition and to being able to define other people effectively, which helps you, even if the paper's falling, it helps you understand more of who you are and be, I'd call a more mature executive, to be able to understand who you are, how I work, where I fit, where I don't fit, what's burning me out, etc. Okay? Great.